What if the greatest leap in human intelligence began with a loss? Not a discovery, not an invention, but a quiet, invisible shrinking inside the human skull. What if the survivors of the Toba Supereruption, those few thousand who walked through ash, hunger, and winter, carried with them a secret that shaped the mind you're using right now? And what if the key to our modern brilliance didn't come from a bigger brain, but from a smarter way of thinking together? Tonight, we follow a trail almost erased by ice and time. A trail that begins in Catastrophe, passes through the narrowing of the human brain, and ends with the widening of human imagination. But to understand why our minds opened as our brains grew smaller, we must return to the years when the world nearly ended. 70,000 years ago, the earth dimmed, ash drifted across continents, seasons failed. The Toba eruption carved a wound into the sky that the world remembers still. Our ancestors lived through this twilight, not with certainty, but with endurance. They gathered around thin fires, walked across dying grasslands, and listened to winds laced with volcanic dust. And for reasons we still study today, the human population collapsed to perhaps just a few thousand, a single crowded valley, a scattered network of desperate camps, a species balanced on a razor's edge. But here, in the cold silence after catastrophe, something subtle began to change, something no one would recognize until much later. Brains began to shrink, minds began to open. Archaeologists first noticed it through bone. Skulls from early Homo sapiens were larger, broader, heavier than the skulls of people alive in the last 10,000 years. By the time the Ice Age waned, the average human brain was smaller by nearly 10%. This should have made us less capable, less inventive, less able to shape the world around us. And yet the opposite happened. Sharper tools, wider trade networks, more intricate storytelling, the birth of symbolic thought. A paradox emerged: smaller brains, greater intelligence. The answer lies not just in skulls, but in people, together. What happens when a species is forced into tiny groups? In a hostile world, they begin to share, not just food, not just shelter, but memory. In the harsh bottleneck after Toba, survival depended on cooperation so tightly woven that knowledge no longer lived in any one mind. It lived between minds, in shared experience, shared stories, shared rituals, shared warnings whispered across the fire. This was the birth of collective memory, a network stronger than any single brain. Smaller brains didn't weaken us, they freed us. They encouraged reliance on the group, on communication, on trust. It was no longer the size of the brain that mattered, but the connections it made. In post-Toba landscapes, cooperation became a tool, as essential as any blade or spear. Families learned to divide labor. Bands learned to share resources. Groups learned to read the land together, to track herds, storms, seasons, migrations. Cooperation sharpened senses. It broadened skills. It turned survival from a solo struggle into a choreography of many hands and many minds. And as cooperation grew, the brain could specialize, lighter, more efficient, more energetically balanced. The shrinking was not decline, it was refinement. After Toba, the archaeological record shifts. Tools, once simple, became elegant. Pressure-flaked points, microliths fitted into composite weapons, grinding stones shaped with mathematical clarity. Smaller brains, perhaps, but more connected minds. More teaching, more practice passed across generations. A tool was no longer just an object. It became a curriculum, a lesson encoded in stone, a message from ancestor to descendant. Each improvement echoed something new in the structure of our thinking, pattern recognition, anticipation, planning, cooperation. As the world recovered from volcanic winter, humans began to leave marks that were not tools, not shelters, but something else. Lines on cave walls, handprints, ritual pigments, symbols that spoke without sound. Art blossomed not during comfort, but during reconstruction, when memory, cooperation, and storytelling became the only bridges over uncertainty. A smaller brain does not weaken imagination. Imagination grows in the spaces between us, in the shared worlds we build together. Language deepened, gesture evolved into grammar, rhythm into meaning, songs into maps of memory. A species that once survived by muscle, now survived by message. Communication allowed complex planning, coordinated hunts, seasonal migrations, long-distance alliances. It created social bonds, strong enough to keep tiny groups stable through famine, storm, and loss. And through these bonds, our ancestors built a mental universe, larger than any individual brain could hold. Even today, traces of Toba's legacy run quietly through us. Our reliance on collaboration, our drive to share stories, our instinct to gather in circles and trade memory like fire. The shrinking of the human brain mirrors the rising complexity of human society. Less weight, more connection, less isolation, more imagination. We are, in many ways, descendants of cooperation born in catastrophe. Imagine a world where survival meant depending on someone else's memory as much as your own, where the story of a hunt was a survival manual, where a painted symbol was a warning across centuries, where a tool held lessons from hands long gone. This is the world that shaped us, not in the heat of the eruption, but in the cold rebuilding that followed. Brains shrank, minds widened, and humanity stepped into a new frontier, the frontier of shared intelligence. So why did smaller brains make us smarter? Because intelligence is not a weight, it is a web, not a single torch, but a ring of fires, not what one person remembers, but what many people keep alive together. The survivors of Toba discovered that a mind is not limited by its size, but expanded by its connections. And in that revelation lies the blueprint of modern humanity. Every innovation, every tradition, every story that carried us from volcanic winter to the world we inhabit now. If echoes of ancient fires still stir something in you, if you find meaning in the quiet steps of our species, as it walked out of ash and into imagination, then stay close to the trail. There are more doors into the deep human past, and together we can find where the next one opens. We survived not because our brains were larger, but because our hearts reached for one another.